Hello, hello. Salam, salam, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'll be joined by Nebiu Asfal in just a few moments, but first want to remind everybody to make sure you are subscribed. Thank you so much for joining. What we're going to do in this session is we're going to try to give you guys some credible updates as far as what is going on the ground. I know there's a lot of news that is breaking on Twitter all the time, but we certainly don't want to get you any false information. We've been in touch with people on the ground and some good sources that would tell us one way or the other where the military uh, front is in Tigray. And we've also been talking to some folks that are involved or are aware of the peace talks. And so we'll try to give you a little bit, what little bit we're able to share on the peace talk. So make sure right now, while we're setting up a little bit, just make sure you send this link to everyone that you know, all the group chats that I know that you're all a part of. I know I'm in so many, whether that's on Twitter or WhatsApp or Telegram. And make sure they join this conversation. Feel free to drop in some comments, talk to each other, and any questions that you have will be fielded by AZ King, who's there in the comment section with us. So if there are any particular questions for myself, for Nebiu, we'll mark that and we'll try to get them answered in this broadcast. So with that said, let me see if I can get Nebiu up here and then we will get going. Thank you so much for joining. All right, Nebiu, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good, Hermit. Can you hear me?
A B frozen.
Okay.
Yes, it's looking like he is frozen. So I'll make sure. I think he's going to try to fix that. So here's the thing. Here's a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. So, the African Union has put out a letter saying that the peace talks started today, Tuesday rather, in South Africa. And there's some interesting bits of information that you can glean from that letter alone. A few things are this. One, we know that former Nigerian President Obasanjo will be a part of this. He's someone that the TPLF did not want to have, and they seem to favor former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was also confirmed to be there, as well as the former Deputy President of South Africa, who is also a part of the talks. The U.S. and the UN, which often feel like the same things, as the U.S. is the highest contributor or the largest contributor to the UN. So the U.S. and the UN are both observers, meaning they are observing the negotiations. The U.S. is the one who got these TPLF leaders on U.S. military planes to South Africa. So there can be an argument to be made for them being observers, but to what extent? Will they actually interfere and get involved in these talks? That is something that that is unclear so far. But if precedent tells us something, they will get involved or they will try to interfere and to influence these negotiations. And from what we've been TPLF and play into their political calculus, a legitimate not going so well. Let me lower my resolution to see if we can get this a little bit smoother. See if this is continuing to cut up. If so, I'm going to have to bring down the resolution. Might be a little bit too heavy on my internet. So that's one thing that we need to talk about is what do the format of these negotiations look like. A couple of more things that were in that African Union letter that are worth noting. They do refer to the TPLF as the Tigray People's Liberation Front, not the government of Tigray as they have in previous letters. It may have been a concession that they gave to the TPLF in order to get them to actually show up to these talks. But nonetheless, it's worth noting that in the most recent letter, that brings up the peace talks that are underway in South Africa today, first day being Tuesday, and will continue till Sunday. In that letter, they refer to them as the Tigray People's Liberation Front. They also use the word Ethiopian-owned negotiations, and of course, refer to the government of Ethiopia as the government of Ethiopia. And someone did also note that the EU is not involved. It's not surprising that the EU is not involved. They at least did not get the TPLF leadership. We're told about 9, although 7 are on paper. They actually got them on U.S. military planes to South Africa. So maybe that's the reason for them to actually sit in on these talks. And so those things I think indicate the format of the talks. And I'm going to bring in Nebiu in here just to get his take on this. And then we'll also break down, what historically is looked at in negotiations, what to consider. The context is very important. So part of the context is there active fighting? In this case, there is. Sometimes these mediations happen after a conflict is over. Have there been previous attempts to get to peace? And what does that look like? And I would argue those previous attempts in this case should go back to 4 years when there were efforts to mediate with the TPLF to get them to be a part of this new government as a part of a peaceful transition, as opposed to a violent one, as one that we are like the one that we are seeing. And then other things to consider is how will their constituents feel about it. So, if you say the people of Tigray are the TPLF's constituents, do they still want them there? What is their experience? We still don't know. We still don't know what the people of Tigray at this point think. We know that some people who have escaped that region have come out and said they were forced to fight or they escaped not to fight. I personally know of people who have family members who have, ran into the major cities in order to avoid it. I've talked to other people who have friends and family members who are in hiding in order to avoid drafts. So there may be a sense that, the people on the ground do not feel like the TPLF represents them. And so maybe it's somebody else. Now, on the Ethiopian side, you have to consider, will the Ethiopian government be able to take whatever becomes of those negotiations to the Ethiopian people and sell that to them? That is also something to consider in negotiations. So these are a few of the things we're going to talk about. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Let me bring up Nebiu Asfal in here and see how it goes. Nebiu, can you hear me? You look great. You're moving.
Not frozen anymore, am I?
I don't hear you though. Try a different mic.
You don't hear me?
Yeah, try a couple of different mics, and we start hearing you. We'll know it's worked. Hey Kenneth, thank you so much. You're always on these lives. You must get an alert. Be like Kenneth. Get
That's
your
fine.
alerts going. Thank you so much, Mark. What is your question about remembering correctly about history? If you clarify that, we'll try to talk about that.
Can you hear me now?
I might have missed the first part of it. A lot
Can you
of
hear me?
comments here. The Constitution is still the same and no hope of moving away from ethnic politics. I know that is something that is of concern to a lot of people. I'm not even going to answer your last question because that is just needless to be said. There are 4 soldiers left to fight this nonsense. TPLF needs to surrender their arms. I hear that last part. No faith in the USFP foreign policy on Africa, nor the TPLF mafia. They must stand firm. Maybe keep talking, and we'll know when your mic works.
Okay.
Let me see if there's something I can do on my end, but I think that control will be on you. So while Nebiu does that, I want to try also bring up a couple of things. So there are 7 people that are listed as being representatives of Tigray, some might argue TPLF, that are listed on that document that has been confirmed, that I've been able to confirm with the source. And, I think it's worth noting who's a part of that. Obviously, it's Getachew Reda and General Saad Khan, 2 very well-known names. Getachew Reda, the spokesperson of TPLF, and General Saad Khan, who is acting as a general in this war, has been in TPLF for a very long time. BA, I'm going to need you to clarify that or give me more in the text in order for me to understand what you're asking. So we're multitasking here, as you guys can see. So one of there's several people that we're trying to figure out who they are exactly. I'm going to bring down Nebiu until he figures out the tech stuff. So there's several people that are listed as part of the negotiators that aren't very well known to a lot of people. All right, let's bring up some of who they are. So you've got Getachew Reda, who everybody knows very well, and then General Saad Khan, who also is well known, had a fallout with Meles Zenawi, somehow is a part of this war. Recently had an interview with the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. And then you've got 5 other people that aren't very well known. So one of them that we'll look into today is Ambassador Wandumu Asamano, who just had an interview with Tigray TV about 3 weeks ago. So we can get a sense of what he thinks. And then that will help you get a sense of how these negotiations might go, right? We kind of already know Getachew Reda and General Saad Khan's at least public persona and public stance, but we don't know the others. We also have Dr. Fasaha Haftetzion, unfamiliar to me. We'll see if Nebiu knows him. If you guys know who these people are, please write in the comment section and we'll see if there's a consensus. We'll share them. Mr. Tolde Gebret Sanai, Mr. Kasa Gabriel Hannes, Mr. Asafa Abraha, who I believe is I know is the brother of C.A. Abraha, who was with TPLF for a long time and then had a falling out that was tried in the courts. And yet somehow, I guess, when these things happen, they all come back together and get on the same side. So it looks like a family member of his, I believe it's his brother. Oh, Lilai, were you hearing Nebiu? Was it me that wasn't hearing Nebiu? If that's the case, you guys let me know. Maybe that's the issue here. Nebiu, come back and then we're gonna try. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
My issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. My bad. All right, we're gonna throw this mic away because sometimes it's just the wires get crossed. Okay, sorry. Shout out to Lilai. Thank you. She saved the day. She said she was hearing you fine. Thank you, Lilai. See, it's like we can only do so many things, so many ears, so many eyes. Jigging out. Thank you so much for your support. Appreciate that super sticker. Nebiu, thank you for making the time again. So great to always have you here, get your take. I want to first just start with the letter that came out of the African Union today, telling us a few things. One is they refer to the Tigray People's Liberation Front as the Tigray People's Liberation Front, as opposed to the government of Tigray, which they have referred to them as a couple of times. I know I just zoomed right in on you, changed up the format. And then they also call this peace process Ethiopian owned, obviously refers to the government of Tigray as government of Ethiopia, as the government of Ethiopia. US and UN are observers in this, and the EU is not mentioned at all. So it doesn't look like they're a part of this. So anything out of that this signals to you, and of course, former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, is in it, something that the TPLF seemed to resist, at least in public, and favor Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, and the former deputy president, I believe it is, of South Africa, who I'm not familiar with, are also a part of these negotiations. So anything from that or that you've learned recently that stands out to you?
Yeah, the common denominator in all that I see is that the TPLF is not getting its way. Not a single demand, not a single desire that they've expressed over the past weeks and months. Every single one of them, they've lost on every front. This is an indication to me that Ethiopia is prevailing, and this is it. The fact that the TPLF is being called the Tigray People Liberation Front itself is a recognition that this is a rebel group on its deathbed, that it's done, and really more and more, this is an indication that the end is here. The end is here. The TPLF has played all its cards, and really there is nowhere else to go but out for the TPLF. In parallel, what's happening on the ground in Ethiopia is already the Ethiopian government is restoring power to liberated areas. in the area of, Waldia, Alamata, and other parts of Tigray. There is work being done to restore electricity. There is humanitarian aid coming in. So this is demonstrating that the Ethiopian government is back in charge of Tigray, and really the only remaining area which is now being contested is Mekelle. And this is the fact on the ground, and it appears that this international institutions are recognizing this. I would say the African Union has been somewhat more fair than this other Western institutions. It says a lot that the European Union is not even part of this, even as an observer. After their NP made that racist comment the other day, you remember? I think it's better he stays in the garden. We'll handle the jungle over here. So I think this smells like victory, Hermi, and this smells like winning for the people of Ethiopia, for the people of Tigray. The light at the end of the tunnel, we've been seeing that, but it appears now we're actually at the end of the tunnel, ready to jump out.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of rumors going around about ENDF capturing Mekelle. Like, I've been trying to confirm that, and you guys, that is not confirmed. I know there's a couple of places that are reporting it on YouTube, and a lot of rumors going around on Twitter. But we know that Mekelle is surrounded, and that is good information. But there is no official information that the airport is in control of ENDF, and that the city as a whole is in control of is being controlled by ENDF. But I will tell you, a really good source told me it looks like will happen soon. Although you always have to consider the plot twist, or the surprises, or the slowing of things that we thought would happen a lot faster when it comes to war. There is, I'm really curious who these people that are a part of these negotiations are, because even, and it looks like that's the case, if this war is won by the Ethiopian government militarily, there's often still a negotiation process, right? So I've been really trying to understand what exactly this negotiation process looks like. I get the sense that even if, and it looks like it will happen during these negotiations, possibly, even if Mekelle, the capital of Tigray, is under the Ethiopian National Defense Forces completely, there has to be a conversation about what's going to happen to this leadership that is now outside of Tigray. So it appears there's 9 people, although only 7 of them are listed in these official documents. So where do they go? And we've heard some reports that they're going to Canada. And what are the rules? How can they operate? Are they allowed to be in Ethiopian politics again? What are they able to do with their money? And their assets? Are they able to use them in the same way that they have been using them when they've been on the inside, or the same way that certain Ethiopia or TPLF allies have been using them to aid them from the outside? So those are things to consider. And so in that, research process of how these negotiations go, context apparently is very important, right? So is there active fighting? There is active fighting. What does it look like? Who does it favor? How have previous attempts at getting to peace look like? And then can they then at the end of coming up with some sort of an agreement, can they each go back to their stakeholders and sell that to them? And so this is really interesting, though, because with the TPLF leadership, will they even go back to Tigray at all? Are the people in Tigray their constituents at all? The election that they had was illegal, and then even if they had a case by going ahead and having that election, they then went to war to make their point. So we've talked to Attorney Daraja Demise about this. The fact that they went to war makes any of their legal claims impossible. So let's go down these context questions, right? Obviously, active fighting, we know who it appears to favor. How would you describe the previous attempts with TPLF to make peace? And I would say maybe start with this active 2-year war, and then I think it's worth going back in the 2 years before that, after the transition.
Yeah, first, Henry, when it comes to the negotiation, if it's a negotiation to surrender, I think that it would have to be a surrender. It could either be unconditional, meaning that they give up their arms, territory, and face justice, or they can surrender with some legal guarantee that they will not be made an object of an attack or no repercussion. I think, you know, there's parties involved in this, especially the West, that are still threatening sanctions and other hostile activities to Ethiopia. I think, in my opinion, this negotiation is to guarantee some kind of a legal protection for the TPLF ringleaders like Debretsion, whether it is to bring them out into exile or whether it is to guarantee some kind of a legal protection for the TPLF rank and files, or at least leaders in Tigray, right? I think that's what's happening, because this is unconventional. But what's really interesting is the rules does not apply to TPLF. So we can go look at precedents, what has happened in the past and other wars, what happens in other part of the world. It just seems like the TPLF makes up its own rule, makes up its own law, and that's always backed by the Western media. It's backed by this Western institutions. So it's really, really difficult and hard to predict what's going to come out of this, or if there's some kind of a play here where they're trying to basically come up with the best possible scenario for the TPLF personnel to come out of it. But if you look at all the negotiations that has happened in the past, at least there's been 3 or 4 attempts that we know of negotiation. The TPLF had basically dragged its feet and used it as a way to rearm themselves and come back. But what is different now is that Ethiopian government is not agreeing to a ceasefire. The defensive offense is at play. So I think we will see. I mean, this negotiation is going to go until Sunday, and a lot will happen between now and Sunday. As you said earlier, there's some rumors or speculations, or that the Mekelle Alula Banage airport has either been taken, or there's fights to take that over as we speak right now. So if and when the military is successful and gets a hold of the airport, it's really in a sense over for the TPLF. But I think the more challenge would be, Mekelle is a big city, it's a big metropolitan area. If the security forces, if you call them security forces, the TPLF, did give up without any kind of negotiation, puts down their arm, or they blend into the population, you don't want there to be chaos in the city where people are robbing each other and things like that. It does happen. That kind of scenario has happened in the past. So for the sake of the people of Mekelle, I think that some kind of a negotiated surrender with some legal protection for the rank and files of the TPLF is essential at this point. We know for a fact that the Ethiopian government has released a message today for the TPLF fighters to submit themselves. That's a form of a negotiation. And to me, it appears that the government is directly negotiating with the TPLF rank and file on the ground in Tigray, because really more and more the Debretsion and the Debre Tzaddik people that are in South Africa are becoming irrelevant because the situation on the ground is progressing by the hour.
And what's interesting about these voices, or the archons, the Getachew Reda, in this time, I don't know if it's a part of protocol or the rules, but you don't see them anywhere speaking. I know Tigray Media House tried to say that Debretsion was recently saying something about we're going to bury our enemies right here in Tigray, but I get the sense that first of all, it wasn't even video. It was a photo that they spoke over, and then later there was a video that was really brief, and it just looked doctored. So, and we see that Getachew Reda, who's usually pretty active on Twitter, hasn't tweeted in the last 6 days. And so I say that all to say these voices are not a part of the conversation right now, right? So there is a chance that is actually good for the people in Tigray who probably are watching TMH and Tigray TV. And yes, they may not be able to differentiate between if it's something new or something old in terms of, what they're saying on Twitter or on video. But nonetheless, these voices are not there right now, which I think gives the Ethiopian government an opportunity to make itself clear about where it actually stands. And I want to read one thing really quickly from one of our viewers, Johannes Fistaha, that I think is a really good note. So we're going to take it, or I'll take it. I'm sure Nebi will agree. Tigray, he says, is also a part of Ethiopia. It will be good to refer to this as the federal government and TPLF instead of Ethiopian and TPLF, please. Noted. I think we're with you there. That's just a matter of fact, and it is the words matter. The other thing too, Nebu, is when we talk about if there was a realistic possibility for Ethiopia to live in peace with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, with the TPLF, I think most people would take it. I'll say majority of Ethiopians will take it, right? But we have to look back at their history, and we can go back 4 years when the transition happened, and so many efforts were made over the course of 2 years that included one of the people that's actually listed as the 7 that are now TPLF representatives and business folks and religious leaders and famous names that went to Mekelle, the capital of Tigray, and did everything they could, from my understanding and speaking with several people with knowledge of it or a part of it. They did everything they could to avoid a war with the TPLF, and the TPLF did everything it could to choose war. So that's 4 years ago. You could even go further back to the way that they operated in the 27 years. You can go further back and note that they started as a very vicious and brutal rebel group for 17 years. We haven't even dealt with that. And I think one of the things that Daraja Demise, the attorney, was saying is, we need to go back and really talk about how much the U.S. knew about who the TPLF is and what they did, because they do have them listed as a tier 3 terrorist organization on some Homeland Security documents. So just going back to that, I want to play Nebu an interview, a recent interview. It was 3 weeks ago, from the third person that's listed as a representative, Ambassador Wondumu Asameno. And I want to get your thoughts on that. So here he is. Essentially, right before this, he talks about how the international body of experts that the UN commissioned, that we'll talk about that in a minute, their issues and their bias. He's basically making a case for them, and then listen to how he refers to the Ethiopian government, and then we'll talk about what part he will play in these negotiations.
A crime of this magnitude, of a genocidal magnitude, cannot be investigated from afar. You cannot have the complete picture without having access to the victims, to the crime sites, to the data on all facets of the crime. So I think the international community, especially those who care about human rights, must put enough pressure. The government of Ethiopia doesn't understand the language of diplomacy. A meaningful pressure must be exerted.
What stands out to you in what he said? There's a lot of things for me.
This guy, I think he's the guy who was, during the TPLF era, the ambassador to Somalia, and he was responsible for leading the sanction on Eritrea. He worked with the West, so this guy is very familiar and friendly with the West, playing footsie, and he's one of the architects of the sanction that was placed on Eritrea. But I think what I hear him saying is just crying and complaining that it's just they're done is what I'm hearing, honestly. I didn't really get much out of him. I think that's what he sounds like.
What if I tell you this was 3 weeks ago? So if you felt like there was a sense of they're
Wow.
done in this clip, Yeah, how how might that change your opinion if I told you this was pre the ENDF offensive that captured multiple cities in Tigray?
Wow. Well, that makes it even more clearer. Where they are, where they're at. Um, you know, yeah. I mean, these guys know they have no way out, and that last ditch effort offensive that they had when they tried to go back into the Amhara region again back in September, right after they broke the peace deal. They gave it all. They gave it all, and they thought that they can break through. I think when that failed, they knew that they were done. But I think that the leaders and including this guy know that time is up. But the one language that the TPLF doesn't know or speak is negotiations. Everything for them is a game. They've been checkmated, but I think they're still going to try to find a way out of this. If it means massacring thousands of people uprising, they would. But I think that we've seen on the ground reports of TPLF fighters already surrendering. Their fighters are surrendering to the ENDF forces. I don't think even if they want to retreat from Mekelle and go into the mountains to launch a guerrilla fight, some people are commenting about that. I don't think that's a possibility. The people are done with them. There's no hunger for that anymore. So I think I think they're done, and it's just really interesting that this comment was from 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and there's so much to glean from the things they say. First of all, I think they're in the practice of accusing entities of things that they themselves are. So the idea that the Ethiopian government is not, doesn't understand the language of diplomacy is, from what I gather, the opposite of what's true. A lot of people would argue they're too diplomatic. Maybe they have to be, considering the stakes and what they hold in their portal. But diplomacy is not something that the Ethiopian government is lacking when it's dealing with this issue and with the TPLF. In fact, one of the things that he says in here that is interesting to me and is very common from TPLF leadership and activists is they always rely on the West to be the independent broker, which maybe 2 years ago we could agree with that. But there's now way too much data to say that the US or the United Nations are objective brokers. And so it seems like they're continuing to rely on the UN International Body of Experts, which Redwan Hussein has rightfully pointed out that one of the commission's so-called experts was calling for an R2P intervention in Ethiopia early on in the conflict, before enough data could even be out there for her to make such a huge call. So she's absolutely not objective. And what we've gathered is Tigray genocide was created for that as the backup. If the TPLF themselves cannot overtake the Ethiopian government, overtake Addis, they've already established this genocide narrative that would then, if it got far enough, or if the consent was allowed to be manufactured without enough resistance from Ethiopians and Eritreans, like we saw, then they were relying on that intervention and potentially military intervention to be able to get the upper hand. And then another thing I thought that was interesting, he said, is, how can we get the full story from remote? But the majority of the stories that we got about Tigray for the first year were remote. Nima El Bagir may have gone to Tigray one time, and we saw that on video. But many of her stories done remotely. The New York Times, Mark Simons, Declan Walsh. Mark Simons was in Addis until he was kicked out for fueling the conflict via propaganda. Declan Walsh, as far as I know, has not stepped into Ethiopia in the last 2 years, but has written pieces in the New York Times saying that the Ethiopian government was involved in ethnic cleansing. So I say this all to say the idea that the US and the UN are observers is pretty uncomfortable, in that it seems like the TPLF is leaning on them to turn the tide. What do you think about the US and the UN being observers in this?
I think that's the biggest liability for peace at this point. And what you said earlier about the TPLF blaming the Ethiopian government, blaming others for what it does. There's actually a term for that: accusation in the mirror, or mirror image propaganda. That's actually a thing. It's a form of warfare where you accuse your opponent of what you intend to do. So, in a sense, everything that TPLF is accusing the Ethiopian government of doing, or the Ethiopian forces of doing, is something that the TPLF has done, is doing, or is planning to do. But it does that successfully because it has an echo chamber in the West. It has a media. If you recall, I mean, you can go back and make the correlation between reports on Reuters, AP, BBC, CNN. I would say 80% of them came from tweets from Getachew Reda, or from some statement from a TPLF. You go through this articles after article and after article, almost entire people that they use are either anonymous sources or they're TPLF sources. So this tells you that the West and the mainstream media has really been operating as the PR arm of the TPLF. So when you have institutions and a party that has clearly shown a pattern of favoring the TPLF, clearly has been biased in and everything. You know, these are the people that were pushing the genocide PR in Congress, trying to get sanctions, trying to get an arms embargo, which they did. I mean, these are serious situations. These are the same entities that pushed 17 United Nations Security Council meetings, all in favor of the TPLF. So, you know, the notion that these very parties that have been fueling this war for 2 years consistently are going to sit down around the table as some kind of objective observers is just really terrifying, because, you know, we're at this point at the cusp of realizing peace, where we can ultimately force the TPLF out of the way and rebuild Ethiopia. But these very forces that have been the root cause and fuel of this conflict sitting on the table is, one, it's going to embolden the TPLF. It's going to give them false hope. And any concession that they would have been forced to make, they're going to think they have some other options and make the situation more complicated, which could potentially mean the lengthening of the conflict or more lives being lost, and this time in urban areas like Magali. So it's a liability. I think that you know, it's been clearly said by Ethiopians that this is an African problem that requires an African solution. The African Union has been an objective mediator in this, and that it should have been left at that. So, you know, if the West really desires, what they desire is peace, they should just back off and let this peace process go through the capable hands of the African Union. These are Obasanjo. I mean, these folks have led countries, have led nations, are respected eldermen in our culture and in Africa, and they're very capable. So I think the complication that this so-called observers bring to the table is a serious liability to the peace process and to the and how quick we can end this conflict.
Yeah, and I think we've said this over and over again. It's that the US is behind the TPLF that gives it the wind beneath its wings. I mean, without the US, they're particularly in a time like this, they really don't have much to work with. But from the very beginning, you know, for those who don't know the context or the history, for 17 years, there were rebels like other groups in Ethiopia that were fighting the communist government. They were victors or were able to win because they were US backed and overthrew the communist government at the time in 1991. Again, it's the US that put them over the line. I mean, for all we know, they could have been rebels for 17 more years, but there was a world shift that was happening from away from communism for many different reasons. And the US was backing them, and that really is what gave them life. And that was the case for the 20 plus years that they were in government. There was, you know, development money that was being given to them every year, even though there were indications that they were misusing that money and that it was actually lining the pockets of leadership and it was not going to development on the ground. And then once again, when they start this war, as opposed to unequivocally saying you are in the wrong, and I've heard arguments made that the U.S. was sort of favoring them or appear to be favoring them or playing two sides in a way because they thought they had 80% of the armaments, and even if there were a minority group and a minority group, so the Tigray People's Liberation Front, a political group, is a minority, like of a minority. It couldn't get any smaller. Even though that was the case, the West appeared to think that if they could, overpower the country with its armaments, then they would then step in and play negotiator, and really the TPLF then would have a seat in government. If they weren't leading it, they would have an equal seat in government after starting the war. That's the sense that I get if they were able to be successful militarily. So once again, just being there, the UN and the US being like these two entities that seem to have the same interest when it comes to this conflict in Ethiopia, is going to give the TPLF this sense that they have more power than they do. And it can be argued that that's the sense that they create for themselves. It's not that the US and the UN are necessarily going to pull them over the victory line at this point, but they will think that. So then when they come to the table, they're not coming in reasonably. Now, Reuters reports a couple of things about what they say they want. So the Tigrayan delegation, I would argue TPLF delegation, has said its focus at the talks in South Africa would be an immediate cessation of hostilities. So we'll talk about I just want to get your take on this before I comment. But they want an immediate cessation of hostilities, unfettered access to Tigray for humanitarian aid, and the withdrawal of Eritrean forces. Nebia, can you comment on that?
These are really the same demands that they've been demanding for months. It's the same story, and it at this point, the TPLF or their backers are in no position to make any kind of demands. Humanitarian access has always been a cue for them. We need more supplies to our troops. That's why every time that the United Nations, the World Food Program, has delivered food, it's been looted and it's been repurposed for war. But right now, a majority of Tigray, 90% of it, has been liberated, and for them to demand humanitarian access, it's there already. It's just that they don't acknowledge it. So what they really want, it means access to humanitarian access. It means the TPLF needs supply. That's what it means. They want Eritrea to be removed. That means that they want to basically have an advantage over the Ethiopian government, that they don't, they want, they don't want any drone strikes. They don't want any, I've been expecting for them to make the demand that the Ethiopian government has to use water guns to fight. That's how silly it is. It's really silly. These demands are just, they say it with a straight face too. At this point, they've been checkmated. They're done. I would guarantee this, Hermi. I would say this: if the United States, Mike Hammer, the State Department, if they were not sitting on the table, emboldening the TPLF, they wouldn't make this kind of demands. It doesn't make sense. These guys are not dumb. They know that it's not going to happen. But this is a PR ploy to, again, give the appearance that the TPLF is still a legitimate entity, and I think it's just being used as a way to really get sympathy from a Western audience, so they could take whatever other action that they want that could potentially bring back the TPLF.
Yeah, I think once again the TPLF is making just the deadly mistake of undermining the Ethiopian people. And what I mean by that is, the more that they continue to make these same demands after being caught red-handed, stealing humanitarian aid trucks, stealing tons of fuel meant for humanitarian aid after invading the Amhara and Afar regions twice, after starting a war, killing national defense forces. These are people's fathers, mothers, children, brothers, sisters. So after killing their comrades who defended the country and lived in Tigray for, in some cases, 20 plus years, then going on to call, like Getachew Reda called it, I believe it was, the initial unilateral ceasefire by the Ethiopian government in June of 2021, a sick joke. And then moving into the Amhara and Afar regions, where a lot of allegations of civilian casualties, as well as casualties of people who were trying to, of course, protect their land, happened. And then to do that a second time in August, and then to come back around at these negotiations with this premise of needing an immediate cessation of hostilities, unfettered access to Tigray for humanitarian aid, and the withdrawal of Eritrean forces, of which we don't have confirmation are in there, but there's a tripartite agreement with the Horn of Africa countries for exactly this purpose. And Ethiopia, as a sovereign nation, has the right to make any decision or every decision in terms of who it can invite to help it fight an insurgency. So over and over again, the TPLF is forgetting that it's not fighting the Ethiopian government. It is presenting itself to the Ethiopian people. So even if this government was to turn into a different government tomorrow, and if it was to be a TPLF sympathizer, they have infuriated the people, and they have proven themselves to be enemies of peace, and simply put, liars. So, how do you see that? I mean, how do you see their complete undermining of the people? Forget the government, it comes and goes, but the people.
It's an utter disrespect to have for the people of Ethiopia. And, they've gotten away with it for 27 years. And how they've gotten away with it for 27 years is because they were backed by this powerful entity, the United States, under mostly the democratic administrations of Obama and so forth, were giving the TPLF over $1 billion a year. I mean, that's unheard of in Ethiopian history, where Ethiopia gets that much money. It was really a payoff for the TPLF, obviously, to play proxy. But what had happened during that time is that the TPLF, I mean, it was one of the most brutal regimes in the world. If you looked at the way they tortured people, I mean, books will be written about this, films, documentaries will be made about this moment in the future, and we would look back and horrified. The things that the TPLF used to get away with people in prison, with how they were raping people, how they were literally pulling people's nails and private parts. I mean, it's terrible to even imagine what a human being can do to another human being. They're talking about genocide. They're the ones who really committed genocide, if there was a genocide, on people in Ethiopia. And the reason I'm bringing up all this historic is to put it into context that the TPLF has a reason to believe that they can do whatever they want to the Ethiopian people. It's like the abusive spouse that can beat up their spouse, that could curse them out, that can do whatever they want, and they continue to do it because they know they can get away with it. Even when they're saying enough is enough, even when the spouse fights back. So unless you have the law jumping in, and imagine it's an abusive spouse and the police is coming in and saying, go ahead, do whatever you want. That's what the West is doing to the TPLF if Ethiopian people were the abused spouses. So even today, just 2 hours ago, the Secretary of State of the United States is tweeting as we speak. Go look at Twitter, right? He's demanding that the delegation demands an immediate cessation of hostilities, and that he's demanding that's the first step towards peace. So this observers, the United States is there as an observer, but it's making demands and dictating the terms of negotiation. That's not an observer, right? So the TPLF thinks they can get away with it. The TPLF thinks they can disrespect the Ethiopian people and get away with it because they have enablers, very powerful enablers, bullies of the world that looks out for it, that backs it up, that really shows the utter disrespect of these entities against the Ethiopian people, and the TPLF really respects that. But I think that's why this will be a historic moment. That's why this is our Adwa the second, because we're collectively, the Ethiopian people have resisted, and we're on the cusp of our triumph. And that we are once again showed that the Ethiopian people are not begging anymore, that we are, I mean, the whole world has been against us. I mean, imagine what Ethiopia went through the last 2 years, literally the entire world. These are world powers with the power of the United Nations. I mean, every agency in the United Nations, from WHO to the United Security Council, the European Union, the United States, the State Departments, Congress, Senate. I mean, all that media, all the quote unquote tier one media of the world has put Ethiopia, you know, has conspired against Ethiopia. And no one has made it through this way. I mean, you look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. I mean, all this country after country after country that faced the wrath of the West have failed. You know, this is really history where Ethiopia triumphed, where Ethiopia resisted. You know, this is really truly another attempt of colonization and that Ethiopia has resisted. So the TPLF thinks they can get away with it. They still think they can get away with it. You know, from some of the speeches we've heard from Debretsion and the ambassador, is that they're used to getting away with it. They're pretty much spoiled, really. That they've gotten all the everything that they've needed. They have no reason to respect the Ethiopian people. But we're gonna have to, you know, we're gonna have to stay put with this. Continue to be united. We're at the finish line, and we're gonna come out roaring as people, and prove once again that Ethiopia will remain a free nation and that we will not be subjugated. That's what's on the line right now. The battle is not in Mekelle. The battle is in South Africa on how these negotiations are going to go, how the narrative is going to come out of there to the world, all that. But we will triumph. We have triumphed. Ethiopia will prevail. Literally will prevail, because right now, you know, all these institutions back in the TPLF are paper tigers. They have no leverage, absolutely no leverage, and they're supporting a rebel group, a mafia, yes, Abinet, a mafia that's basically done and dissipated, and all they're doing is just throwing a tantrum, and they're really good at throwing a tantrum, but tantrum is not going to cut it anymore.
I think it's such an interesting point you make with there's an interesting element I see in what you just brought up. Secretary Anthony Blinken tweeted, you're right, 2 hours ago, which would make it about, if my math serves me correctly, about 8 p.m. DC time, Washington, DC time. So he says, we welcome the talks beginning today between the government of Ethiopia and Tigrayan authorities, different than the language that was used in the African Union letter, which refers to them exactly as who they are, as the Tigray People's Liberation Front, at least that is their name. And he says, we call on the delegations to reach an immediate cessation of hostilities, the first step towards peace. So first of all, calling them authorities, already giving them way more of leverage than they have earned. They're not authorities. The election that they allegedly held, where they won 99% of the votes once again, as all of their elections indicate, even in Ethiopia when they were, you know, the most hated, they still said they won by that much. So the fact that he called them authorities, the US, the UN, are they actually independent observers? And then to ask for exactly what they're asking for, I mean, they just shouldn't ask for anything at all, right? I mean, as the US, should they just not be encouraging that these talks lead to peace, as opposed to asking for an immediate cessation of hostilities, which is exactly what the TPLF delegation is looking for, because they're losing when they, and I think this is worth reiterating over and over again, are the ones that broke the second ceasefire. They started a war, broke one ceasefire, broke a second ceasefire, and this is a response to that. So it just indicates absolute bias. And I want to get your reaction once again to this idea of the U.S. not being an objective observer. But I want to pull up some videos of Ambassador Hammer in Tigray right before this last TPLF offensive, taking selfies with TPLF leadership. 2 of them listed as part of the, not Debretzion's not listed, but Debretzion's considered the president of Tigray. And then Getachew Reda, who's listed as part of the 7 and is the spokesperson for the TPLF, pictured with the special envoy for the Horn, the U.S. special envoy for the Horn, Ambassador Hammer, who's the one who escorted these guys and more in U.S. military planes to South Africa, as well as the EU rep. And then we will also see at the end of this Ambassador Hammer and the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia in Tigray in front of a storage unit completely full of aid at a time where the TPLF was saying that Tigray was under siege. So what was your reaction to these pictures then? And then, even from this lens, looking at it now, looking at the fact that Ambassador Hammer brought them out of Tigray, is with them in South Africa, what does it again indicate to you about US's involvement with the TPLF? So I'm going to pull that up now.
When I saw that, I was disgusted and I was shocked. Really, these are warlords. These are people that are criminals, and really they're getting the treatment of a statesman, and this is the type of attitude and treatment that infuriates the Ethiopian people. And this is why the Biden administration has failed to win the hearts and minds of Ethiopians. Because, how long is enough for the TPLF to rule Ethiopia? How long? Is 30 years enough? 40 years is enough? Or are they trying to create a monarchy? They know, Hermela, they know the game is over. What they're trying to do now is trying to force overtime, hopefully with the hope that they can get another, they can catch the Ethiopian government slipping so they can get another opportunity to come back. Meaning, in a sense, prolonging the war and, doing whatever it takes to bring back the TPLF forces. So what I would have expected from the State Departments or the Biden administration was to call on the TPLF to say, hey, it's enough, disarm. Ethiopia, good or bad, it has an elected government that the people would prefer over the TPLF. The TPLF was overthrown by a popular revolt because of its tyranny over the people, that the people have had enough of it. The right thing to do would be, even now, we could say let bygones be bygones. There's a military victory at hand. It's very clear that the United States can come out of this as a winner, or at least as an objective party, if they were to come out and call on the TPLF to disarm or to stay out of it. So that's the problem. And I would argue that if the TPLF had not had the level of diplomatic support from the West, that this war would have ended long time ago. It would have ended during the first phase of the war back in 2021, early 2021. It would have ended during the second round, and it would end now. And the reason that the war has gone on for 2 years is, I think we've talked about this on the other segments, is because the Ethiopian government was attempting to appease the Western powers by giving concessions. But what we've seen time and time again is the more concessions the Ethiopian government made, the more demands that were being asked of it to give to the TPLF. So it's been crystal clear that the aim is to bring back the TPLF, to give them a lifeline. And the shenanigans that we see now is still a reflection of that. But I'm really pleased and pleasantly maybe surprised by the level of determination the Ethiopian government is showing now. This is the kind of Jagninnet that the people of Ethiopia has been wanting, and that this Jagninnet we're witnessing now, will put an end to this. Like I mentioned earlier, all these threats, all these demands being made, it means nothing. There's no leverage they have over Ethiopia anymore.
Yeah, another thing worth touching on, I don't want to give it too much space, is, some of the allegations that are now being made by TPLF activists. It's not even really TPLF spokespeople because they're not out there speaking. It's TPLF activists, which oddly enough, sometimes are way more insane and way more brutal than official spokespeople and tell way bigger lies. So one of the things that we're not seeing this time, and this Reuters report on the talks as an example of this, is they're not accusing the Ethiopian government of civilian atrocities, right? The only thing that they're saying is this fighting has raised fears of further harm to civilians. But what you see on the TPLF activist side, they claim to be Tigrayan activists, is insane uncorroborated lies. One of them being that Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki is telling people to kill everyone under 7 or 8, or that they have to kill 3 people each. And then I saw Maaza Gide, one of the spokespeople, although she says she's a Tigray activist, she's very much a TPLF activist, saying that they're killing, the Ethiopian government is killing, all boys under 7 or 8 years old. They were saying things like this in the beginning. And some of it, the mainstream media was picking up, some of it wasn't. But it's really interesting that they're still back on that loop with no evidence on the ground. We heard that Ambassador Wandumu Asamino saying, like, how could you report from a distance? Well, they were for first year. There were huge accusations that were being levied on the government, the people, and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Fano militia, all from a distance, from these activists actually feeding them this information. So it is interesting, and I saw other indications where mainstream media is, walking it back a little. They're still blurring the picture, but they're walking it back a little, as they often do. We saw what happened with Iraq. All of a sudden, everybody was on the same page about the fact that this war was started on false premises of weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had. So they are shameless in that sense. They'll turn around and say, oh yeah, this is the new information now, or this is what we're going with now. And so it seems like there's a slight indication that they're shifting in that sense. So I want to use the last 15 minutes. We're going to get off at the 15th after the hour because Nebu he needs to go. And so I want to go through and read some people's comments and questions. So if you've got questions you want us to directly answer, now's the time to put them in there. Okay, let's see. Dave says, I think the next TPLF strategy could be to engage in guerrilla fight. That's a comment. What do you think about that, Navi? Do you see that happening?
Well, they've done it before. That's how they came back out of it last time. But the difference is that they had somewhat some support from the people. I think that people are, after 2 years, that people are tired. Remember, just a week ago, right before the Syria was liberated, they were saying, "Oh, the people of Syria are going to be massacred." Right before Adwa or Aksum was liberated, they've been saying they're going to be massacred. But what has happened is town after town after town, as towns are being liberated, the people of Tigray are seeing that aid is finally getting to them. Electricity is being restored. This military people are their brothers and their sisters, and they're there for them, and they're seeing the TPLF like crumble. So I don't think that there's an appetite for the TPLF. If we're seeing, I mean, I think you've seen a few of the interviews of the TPLF soldiers, very young women and girls and boys that are giving interviews about their experience there. They're tired. They're done with it. And that to hold a guerrilla fighting, you need a motivated, really motivated fighting force, which the TPLF does not. A lot of their forces are forced into it. through forced conscription. It's not a voluntary army. It's not a voluntary rebel force. Their mothers were and families were being forced into giving up children. So when the people see that there's a way out of this, they're going to choose. So based on that, I don't think that the TPLF has an option to launch a guerrilla fight. If they do, I don't think that it will be a successful one.
I agree. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. This, despite the TPLF not understanding otherwise, this isn't 1975 or 1991. And the fact that they don't understand that is why we're able to actually see a lot of their holes in their narrative, is because they were literally using the same playbook. It didn't work for those in the diaspora. It didn't even work for those in the international community, at least those that wanted to actually understand what was going on. You guys might have seen the interview I recently did on Redacted. That's a channel that's picking up the Ethiopia story. They actually were kind of going on the Tigray genocide narrative for a while, and a lot of you wrote to them and said, you guys are getting a lot of things right, but you're not getting Ethiopia right. So please have, Jeff Pierce or Hermela on, and they had Jeff on some days back, and then they had me on today. And then we've been on Jimmy Dore and so many other platforms that in a different time would never even hear our perspective. So definitely, I don't think this is an era where anybody has the appetite for guerrilla fighting like they did back in the 1970s. So we'll make this kind of a fast round. I'll let you answer, and then I'll give my answer. We'll make it just like a quick, it doesn't have to be a detailed answer. Maybe it can be a word. We'll see. We'll make it a little bit different. Okay, so Brahana Meskel asked, how should Ethiopian government approach the transition in Tigray?
I think that there should be a transitional government put in place, made up of Tigray opposition parties and friendly forces. The transitional government, that's one option. The second option would be temporarily military rule until things stabilize, maybe for a year or two, and then have an election where the people of Tigray can choose between legitimate parties that would vote for an election.
I tend to agree with the latter version of what you're saying. I just do not fathom a scenario where there's an election in Tigray for a transitional government, or even a selected government. I mean, there may be people that are transitional officials, but I don't know if you can actually call them a government properly. They would just be, transitional officials. But I think the military, unfortunately, has to be a really important part of ensuring the peace, much like UN peacekeepers do, but we're going to have Ethiopian National Defense Forces peacekeeping for the sake of Tigray, for the sake of Ethiopia as a whole. Ethiopia asks, do you think TPLF's negotiators come back? Okay, I think you're saying, do you think the TPLF or its negotiators, maybe the ones listed, would come back to Tigray? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think they got a one-way ticket out of Ethiopia. I don't think they're going to come back. Just like how the Derg negotiators in 91 did not come back from London, I don't think the TPLF so-called negotiators will be back to Ethiopia.
Yeah, same. My question for that is, would you go back? I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know. If you got a free ticket out after doing all that you did on a U.S. military plane, I mean, why would they? They can continue to pretend to fight for the people from a distance. And so I just really don't see them sacrificing themselves, although they're still going in U.S. military planes if they were to return. I tend to agree. Just a more comment. Kabda says, Tigray for safety should be under Ethiopian military for at least 2 years. And then here's a question. What do we do with the USA? Literally, we're negotiating with them. I mean, it kind of feels like we are negotiating with them. What do you think of that question?
Yeah, there's really nothing you can do with this administration, but I would recommend it for people to vote for change.
What do you think? Oh, there's a comment. I can't pull it up now because it's somewhere else. Actually, there it is. Okay, someone said, and this is something I would like you to address. Please, all of you, don't vote Democrats this midterm.
I think that person, I mean, I've been a Democrat for very long. I'm not anymore. I'm independent, but I understand the frustration of Ethiopians and Eritreans with the Democrats. And I would say vote your conscience, but don't sit it out. Vote, and vote for change. But I would say this. What I really hate is generalizing parties. I look at the individual. Like if you look at the AEPAC, if you go to the AEPAC endorsed candidates, believe it or not, a majority of them are still Democrats. So there's still a lot of Democrats that are friends with our community. People like Karen Bass that actually are working with us, like Sheila Jackson in Texas, or Garamudu. So there's people, and there's also Republicans like Chris Smith. So what I would say is look at the individual on their stance on Ethiopia. But I would say definitely most of the Democrats have been anti-Ethiopia. If they're anti-Ethiopia, vote them out. But vote your conscience. Do your research on where the person stands on Ethiopia.
Yes, I agree. Sometimes I think some of the Republicans, if given the opportunity, might be worse. There's indication from some of the conservative think tanks that they might be more aggressive, more military, not undercover, but more less covert. So I would be careful too with generalizing. I did put APAC's website in the comment section. I'll try to find it and pin it, but it's AEPACT.org. They have looked into certain candidates and will give you suggestions on who to vote based on their stance in Ethiopia. We're going to take a few more questions before we wrap, everybody, and I'll be back tomorrow with some more updates on this. Let's see, Rahana Meska, we already did one from you, so let's do another one. Okay, here's one. T asks, Nebiyu, what's your personal belief about international aid offices that have inundated Addis Ababa? Do we really need 100 NGOs? I'm not sure that's how many, but I think the point is, do we really need a lot of NGOs in Ethiopia?
Absolutely not. You're right on point. I think that there is a lot of good nonprofits and NGOs that really do a good work for people, and our country has a lot of poverty, and unfortunately, we still need a lot of aid. So there's a lot of good NGOs. With that said, there are also some NGOs that are used as a proxy by forces that have other ill intentions. We know from history where for example, U.S. aid, Samantha Power has literally on her hearing in Congress had said that if she was confirmed to be the director of U.S. aid, that she was going to use this office to make sure that for the security interest of the United States is secured, meaning that she's going to use it for policy and for other military and services that have nothing to do with aid. So Eritrea, I'll use Eritrea as an example. I don't think that Eritrea refuses to get aid, but I don't think there is a famine in Eritrea. I don't think people are dying of hunger in Eritrea, but Eritrea has defended its sovereignty. So I think that it's dubious that there's so many NGOs in Ethiopia, and that all this conflict that we're having, a lot of it, including the TPLF getting supplies and aid and satellite communication and all that, has been alleged with some credible evidence in some areas that they were using this aid offices. And we know for a fact in history in the 80s that was the case. And we know that there's indication that's happening now. So we really have to be careful of all these NGOs that are operating in Ethiopia. Like I said, there's good ones that we should work with, but we should be very cautious.
Absolutely. Pharaoh, to that point, says the NGOs make big profit in war zones. Juju says U.S. aid is typically a political proxy. Yeah, Samantha Power does not have a good reputation in other communities and countries as well. So she is definitely on record, has precedent of abusing that position in order to fuel war. Mizan says, don't expect Westerns to support United Ethiopia. They are pro-fragile African government. We Ethiopians will win this war. And let's do one more question, and then we're gonna wrap it up. This one maybe is a quick one, so we'll do two. Johannes Fisad, it might just be as simple as, I don't know, why is Debretsion and Mongiorno I think you're familiar with her. That's her nickname. Also TPLF top member. Why are they not a part of this delegation? Do you think something is fishy? Was it not their choice to leave? I mean, they did say the reports were 9 TPLF members, and we're only seeing 7. Debretzion's not on there, and Mongiorno, who is a leading name, is not there. Any answers to that or any indication?
It's very unusual for the head of any warring group to sit in negotiations. So it's like Abiy Ahmed going sitting on the table, right? So I think that if they were to present Debrecen on the table, it just would show the desperation. I would say that if they had some PR advisors, they would tell them not to put Debrecen on the table. That doesn't mean he's not out of Ethiopia or with them in South Africa, but I don't think there's protocol where the head typically sitting there, unless it's the final negotiation to transfer power.
Yeah, and I also, from my understanding and my observation, Debretzion's not, the best speaker. I mean, he reads what's written for him, but he's not someone that can go, sort of head to head with you. He's a tech guy. He was doing their technology communications back when they were rebels and sort of stayed that way. So maybe that's part of the calculation, but it makes sense what you're saying too. Last question is going to go to Dawit. I think this is an interesting question. He says, now that the TPLF actors, as in the leading ones, are out, what do you think the government of Ethiopia what do you think of the government of Ethiopia giving an absolute amnesty to all Tigrayan forces, including the rank and file TPLF insiders? I think the question of how do you deal with the cadres and the folks who join this fight, whether by force or because they were convinced that it was what they needed to do to survive this genocide, which is a completely made up allegation. I just want to be very clear for anyone who is not familiar with this Ethiopia story. It was something that was created for the TPLF to have cover and explain away why it slaughtered National Army Defense Forces and started this war. So, but with that said, and I talked to Solomon Waldegarima, who's someone from Tigray that's based in Addis, and he said, we really need to figure out how to communicate to the rank and file that the Ethiopian government is not going to just round them up and hurt them, and that they're willing to figure out who is who and who's a danger and who's not, and go through a certain process. So what's the general take? I mean, what's your take, and have you talked to anybody about how they feel about how the government of Ethiopia should deal with the people there who have picked up arms and become a cadre and a part of what they call the Tigray Defense Forces, the TDF, and maybe have committed many atrocities as well?
I think that from what I've heard on debates and conversations, it's more towards the leadership of the TPLF, whether they should get an amnesty or not. But when it comes to the rank and file, I don't think there's a whole lot of controversy as far as giving them amnesty. I mean, this is 200, 300,000 people. I think that there has to be a process, though. There has to be a process where some of those forces have committed atrocities. Some of them have committed war crimes, and not a single TPLF force has been held accountable, right? And some of their victims are still alive. The women that have been gang raped, the children that have been gang raped are still alive. And if there is ways to verify and identify these perpetrators, that they should be brought to justice. There should be no amnesty for those that have created heinous crimes. And there's record of that. And I'm sure that as more of the TPLF things are become in custody, whether it's paperwork, computer record, that kind of stuff, that should be investigated, and people within the rebel forces that have committed this should be identified and held accountable. But I think, generally speaking, to their rank and files, which many of them, by the way, are children who are forced into war, I think that some kind of a conditioning or training and de-brainwash work should be done. But I don't think that I think that it would be okay to selectively give the majority who were forced into this amnesty. That could be part of the reconciliation process.
Yeah, and I would think that they need to go through some sort of rehabilitation as well. I mean, there's a process.
Exactly.
Even veterans who are, adults they pick up a gun to defend a country. When they come back from wars, there's a process that they go through, a rehabilitation process, and if they don't, and when they don't, they tend to just not fit well in society and become a danger to themselves and others. So it doesn't. I don't see why that would not be necessary there too. And Haile says to that point, when they drop the weapon, they become Ethiopians. I think that generally is, the sentiment. But again, I do agree with Nebiu that there needs to be a process so that more people don't get hurt. So tomorrow is day 2 of the peace talks in South Africa. They're said to be African Union led. Former Nigerian President Obasanjo, former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, as well as the former Deputy President of South Africa, Phumzile Mlambo Nguka, is also a member of the mediation team, and the U.S. and the UN are observers. It will go through Sunday. The military operation on the Ethiopian government side is underway. And to the point that we were just talking about holding some of the lower level cadres that maybe have committed atrocities, some of them accountable. The Ethiopian government's doing that too. I've heard the number 50, but yesterday, Dereja Demise, an attorney, so the Ethiopian government has arrested 30 people in his ranks that have committed atrocities. So this isn't a one-sided situation. We are going to expect that the Ethiopian government does this for all sides, as the government and the elected government of Ethiopia. Nebiu Asfaw, thank you so much. Ethiopian American organizer, co-founder of the Ethiopian American Development Council. Thank you so much for giving us your time again.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you for all you do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'll be on live. I don't think I could get Nebiu to do another day with me, but I'll definitely be on live to talk about the latest. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your support. And make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Like, subscribe, and share so that people can get caught up if they don't watch it live. Thank you guys. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.